Hello everybody, this is Dr. John Morris and welcome to chapter 4 of Jonah. You've made it all the way through. Yahoo! We're finally going to learn some new things in this chapter. Things we've been worried about the whole book of Jonah. And we're not going to get all our questions answered though, so I think that's a part of Jonah. So let's look at what we do learn in Jonah. First of all, we get a two-way conversation between Jonah and God. Up until now, we've seen Jonah praying to God. We've seen God giving a message to Jonah, but we actually haven't seen a two-way conversation. And in chapter 4, we see Jonah talking to God and God responding. Now, I'm not sure we see Jonah listening to God, but it is a two-way conversation, and I think that's part of it. And it ends with God asking Jonah a question, and it might be the ultimate question, and it's kind of the same question that God asked Job. Not the same, but the same general type. And God asked Jonah, "Is it good for you to be mad at me?" Now that's a pretty tough question if you think about it, because we all get mad at God sooner or later. Is it good to be mad at God? And Jonah doesn't answer that question other than to say, for me, yes it is. Because Jonah can't tolerate God's mercy and justice. Jonah is very comfortable with justice being applied to other people and mercy being applied to the Hebrews, but when God's mercy gets applied to other people, Jonah goes, nope, that's not the God I know, it's not the God I want. I would rather die. I am so mad at God, I would rather die and not be in a world where God can be merciful to foreigners. And so God, in the end of the chapter, again revisits Jonah and builds him a nice shelter. That's where I'm wearing my straw hat today. I've got my little shelter to hide me from the sun today, like Jonah. And God gives Jonah a straw shelter, and then the shelter is taken down. And Jonah is mad about that. And in essence, Jonah is saying, I care more about my hat, my shelter, than a city full of sinners that have repented and received your mercy. And then Jonah ends very, very, I don't know if it's suddenly, but it ends abruptly. And a question has been raised, is it good for you to be mad at me? We see a little parable talking about, demonstrating how silly it is for Jonah to be mad at God, but the question is never answered. And I think the reason it's never answered is it forces us to come to an answer for ourselves. So we can look at Jonah, we can see what we know about his personality, we can see a lot we don't like in Jonah, we can see a lot like ourselves in Jonah. How many times have we prayed to God and asked him to do something before we ask him if that's his will? So we're thinking, yes, God, I want you to do this. I don't care what you think. I want you to do this because this is what I want. We're kind of putting ourselves in his place. Or have we ever said, you know what? Those people can never receive mercy. Or maybe even worse, God has forgiven those people, but I refuse to forgive them. And when we do that, we're emulating Jonah. We're putting ourselves in God's place, and we're saying our judgment takes precedent over God's judgment. And that's not a good thing to do. So the book ends with this question open. And I think you have to ask yourselves, how would Jonah answer the question? How would Jonah's original audience answer the question? And how are we going to answer the question today? Is it good for me? Is it good for you to be mad at God? And hopefully you will come to the decision that no, it's not good for me to be mad at God. And if I am mad at God, I need to change my attitude to match God's rather than telling God to change his attitude to match me. And if you think about a lot of the Psalms, the laments in the Psalms, that's exactly what we see, that process we see. Psalm 22 is a good one. The person writing the Psalm, David, in this case, is mad at God. He rails against God. He calls for God to do something. He demands that God do something. But before God ever responds, David switches over to praise. And it's great praise, and it's praise for the generations. And David knows he can start praising God and change his attitude about God before God has done anything, because God is dependable. And he knows that God will fulfill his covenant. Now today, I think the exact same thing applies to us. We occasionally might get mad at God, but we should change our attitude to match God's. We ought to start praising him. because He has told us how things will end. He has told us that He will restore us in the person of Jesus. He has promised us that we will have eternity with Him. And that is worthy of praise regardless of what we see here in this world. So thank you very much for staying with me for this class on Jonah. I hope these videos have helped. Feel free to leave some comments in the evaluation if you think there's any way this class can be better. So until next time in another class, bye-bye.